Welcome to today's webinar, Supply Chain Risks and Responsibilities, a keynote from Saul Resnick, CEO of DHL Supply Chains, with our corporate member Michael Page and our Risk Committee Chair. I'm Monique Fennick from Australasian Supply Chain Institute. And before we get started, I'd like to run through some housekeeping for the webinar. First, a technical check to ensure that everyone can hear me. Raise your hand if you can hear me. Fantastic, thank you. Please let me know if in the chat box if you have any technical problems today, and I'll help you out. Two other housekeeping items for today. We'll be running a poll throughout the webinar, which will publish anonymous results. So please help us keep today as interactive as possible and respond to those polls. The Q&A section you see is not anonymous. Instead, it allows for you to post your questions to the panel and for other attendees to see. Please use this opportunity to provide answers to your questions in this webinar. There'll be plenty of time at the end to share responses to the panel, and Saul will be ready for your questions. We'll be awarding one CPD point to attendees from today's webinar. Just type CPD into the Q&A box, not the chat box, but the Q&A box, so that we know you require a CPD point to go towards your registration or certification maintenance. The webinar is recorded and will be uploaded to the ASCI Resources Library for members, and a closed LinkedIn group post will be created for further discussions after today's webinar to continue the discussion. To kickstart the webinar, may I introduce our co-host for today, Anna Costa. Anna is a recruitment professional who specialises in technical disciplines with clients and candidates across diverse industries, including FMCG, healthcare and industrial. She's been working in Michael Page for more than 3 years, where she was recently relocated from Brazil to Australia to look after supply chain for New South Wales. Being passionate about changing people's lives, Anna has a strong focus on stakeholders' satisfaction and building long-lasting relationships. I'll ask Anna to now unmute herself. Welcome, Anna.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Monique. It's my pleasure to be here again in this beautiful day in Sydney. I'm glad that we're still able to meet and discuss the relevant topics about supply chain, if without seeing each other. So thank you so much, ASCI, for that, for keeping running the webinars. So for those who attended our last webinar in the 21st of April about operational excellence, this market update is not something new, but actually we didn't have an expressive change in the market in the last few weeks. So in fact, it reassured what we already knew. So for those who didn't attend our last meeting, I would like to bring some few information about the impact of COVID in New South Wales. So as we already know, the first industries to be affected by the isolation measures were the hospitality, entertainment, everything related with tourism, where casuals were the first to be laid off. So I believe we won't see any sign of expressive recovery in these industries until the quarantine is fully over. In the other side, some essential businesses are still working as usual. For example, most of the supply chain jobs I worked in March were for food and chemical companies. So if you are looking for a job in New South Wales today, the best industry to focus right now are healthcare, food, FMCG in general, and logistics and transport companies. It's true that the majority of the companies today are in hiring freeze, but another field that is still warm is government and construction because of the infrastructure projects that are still running. But if you would like to have a deeper discussion on market, your career or your business, you can reach me out on LinkedIn or by email, and I will be happy to help you. Now talking about unemployment, I was expecting to have the April's number from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, but we must wait a few weeks more to have the updated report for April. So in March, we didn't have a significant increase in the employment rates in the country because of the crisis was just in the beginning. But today we already have 1.3 million people receiving the job seeker benefit from the government in Australia. What I always like to say is that we are living a healthcare crisis that leads to a financial crisis. So once the isolation or the COVID itself is over, we can hope to have the market returning the pace it was before quickly if it was just a financial crisis. Let me bring a few recruitment facts about this period. As I say, the company's first reaction to the boom of Corona was to lay off casuals and bring the permanent employees to a part-time basis. And it's also interesting that we saw new jobs being created that we never thought that could be hiring, like the temperature check person to be in the door of the factories testing the employees before each shift. And with the panic buying in March, we also had to hire almost 2,000 casuals in 1 week to work in supermarkets to help to replace the shelves. So in our April webinar, I run this poll asking, is your company hiring now or expecting to hire in the next 3 months? So if you were in the last webinar, you answered this poll. And as a result, we had that only 10% of the companies were still hiring. So here we go, the poll again, so we can see if anything changed in the last 2 weeks. And to finalize, I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Please feel free to reach me out if you need any support during these times. We have really helpful material about remote working, onboarding that you can use as a guidance in your business. And if you need any recruit support for your team in Australia or New Zealand, please let me know. Okay, enjoy.
Thanks very much, Anna, and we're just going to share the results of that poll now. So get your responses in within the next 5 seconds. And here we go, we'll share those results. So any surprises there for you, Anna?
Yeah, we had an increase in the numbers. The last poll shows us that only 10% of the business were hiring. Now we have 21, which is a good sign, I guess, for the kickoff of May.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anna. And I'd now like to introduce the ASCI Risk Committee Chair, Mark Skresbeck. Mark has 15 years of experience driving operational excellence across supply chain and logistics operations in the B2C and B2B sectors. He has worked across multiple industries, leading and developing supply chain transformations. More recently, as head of logistics for Miele, Mark established 2 greenfield distribution facilities while implementing new processes, including cloud-based digital applications to create a customer-centred, award-winning logistics function in full alignment with the organisation's premium brand promise. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Monique, for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I hope that you are all safe and well, and that your supply chains are seeking some of the opportunities that COVID-19 presents. You may not know, but supply chain management, despite its complexity and seniority within the organisation, is not a profession in Australia or anywhere in the world, in fact. We at ASCI, as the accreditation body for supply chain management, are a not-for-profit organisation pioneering the mission so that our members can have a seat at the board table. Through this representation, we're confident that will translate to a better customer experience. The framework for a professional accreditation scheme includes 3 committees, of which contribute to an overall professional accreditation body for members: the Technical Committee, Ethics Committee, and Industry Risk Committee. On a practical level, that means our members register as one of the 3 pillars of supply chain management: operations, logistics, or procurement, or ILS if they are a defence personnel, and thereafter can register as a supply chain manager. How do you become eligible for registration? By equipping ourselves with global best practice end-to-end supply chain knowledge, and certification is a great option to brush up on your knowledge. While you can choose to self-study APIC certifications, they come with a platform of digital resources as well as textbooks. You can also choose a hybrid solution, of which is self-study and online certification review. Evening classes will commence in July. You can scan the QR code on your phone's camera to subscribe to the information pack for updates on pricing and scheduling if you are watching the recorded version of this webinar, or wait to receive the link to the info pack if you're registered to this live webinar. It is my pleasure to introduce Saul Resnick, CEO of DHL Supply Chain, as our keynote presenter for today's webinar. Saul has propelled innovative supply chain solutions for the logistics industry for many years. In both his current role as CEO, Australia and New Zealand, and as previous roles as Managing Director and Vice President of Life Sciences and Healthcare across Asia Pacific. Saul has been instrumental in working with DHL's customers to innovate and improve efficiency across their supply chains. He is passionate about the supply chain due to its essential part of the economy, sustainability, and everyday lives of people around the world. As the leader of the business, which has direct and significant impact on customers, Saul is driven to be a strong ambassador for change, innovation, and improvement within the global DHL business. Welcome, Saul.
Well, thanks, Mark. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me to ASCI. And just to dispel any rumors that the reason the video is not working, it's not because of bandwidth. Apparently, I was told by Monique that I've got a better face for radio. So that's why I'm just teasing, don't worry. Not trying to take it off Monique. So yeah, welcome to you and thanks for having me. I believe I can control the presentation. Is that right, Monique? Sorry, I'm just trying to see that I am actually changing it. Monique, perhaps if you don't mind, if you could just carry on running the presentation, I'll just tell you when to change. It seems to be easier. Thanks so much. So the theme that I've been asked to talk to is regarding obviously the interesting time we live in with COVID is how do we secure the supply chain in these uncertain times? And I'll be talking about how businesses are changing during COVID-19 with obvious focus on how DHL is going about securing supply chain during this uncertain time and how we are helping our customers during this rapid change. Today's theme is risk and responsibilities in the supply chains, which clearly none of us could have anticipated a short time back. And I think to myself, I think back when we first realized how serious this was, and I'm not ashamed to say that initial reports coming probably mid to late January, it seemed to be a problem that was logistically, from our perspective, not going to massively affect us. It seemed to be a challenge that was primarily linked to China at the time. The information we were getting was sketchy. It was like the flu. Nobody would get that ill, and only if you were really old would it affect you or very ill. That kind of misinformation that most of us were fed. So for the most part, we carried on with life as normal up until I think it was the weekend of the, I'd say, infamous Bondi mass gathering on the beach. And then we realized that this is not, just based on the world outcry for those countries that had been affected, that this was something not to be taken lightly. And we acted reasonably quickly from that. So I'll talk a little bit about what we did, but I wouldn't stand here in front of you or sit here in front of you today and saying that we saw this coming. We knew exactly how to deal with it. We've had to do a lot of learning on the run as well. But I believe we've responded as well as we could have. But obviously, the benefit of hindsight, I suspect there are things we could have put in place earlier as well. So thanks, Monique. The agenda, I'll just cover off a few key points. My ideal is not to bore you with PowerPoint presentation. It really is to have an engaged discussion. So I'll touch lightly on each of these topics on those 5 agenda points, but hopefully engage with you on some meaningful discussions as to what's practically happening in our business, our industry, the wider industry, and any questions that pertain specific to your business. If you feel that I have something to add, obviously I will try to. We are in a unique position not just within DHL, but in a supply chain organization of our size and scale, in that we get to see a number of customers in a number of industries. And often are the, I suppose, the bellwether of what's going to happen. And from that perspective, clearly we've seen quite a bit in the last few weeks, which I suspect may be of some interest to this audience. So thanks again. If we could go to the next slide. So I suppose talking about our diverse exposure to multiple sectors, I'll talk to three specific sectors where we are quite strong. We're probably, as an industry player, we're probably the biggest in the health space, number 2 or 3 in the retail, and in terms of what we do for the airline industry as a 3PL, we've got significant contracts there as well. And we've seen, dramatically different responses in each of these specific sectors. So starting with retail, everybody saw the mass panic buying that happened in early to mid-March. It's just anecdotally walking through the supermarket yesterday and seeing toilet paper on the shelves with nobody doing a dive bomb for them was quite nice to see. Whereas in weeks gone by, that was a unique scenario. So we saw that panic buying on the one hand. We saw a lot of customers who supply front of store, pharmacy or general grocery supplies being very busy, incredibly busy. We did some short-term deals with 1 or 2 of the big grocery stores to supply product where there was just for home delivery because of the absolute shortage of product, of necessary products, essential products in store. But then the other side of retail has had nothing near as positive from a sales point of view. We've seen a number of large fashion retailers shut their doors, some going to administration, some just take a hiatus from doing business practically, and some in the middle where we've seen customers who have seen a rapid change in the way they've sold products. So 5-fold increase in B2C traffic, whilst retail traffic coming to a standstill. So very interesting dynamics and how that has changed. On the health vertical, it's almost diametrically opposed to that. So we've seen relatively steady supply of most pharmaceutical products. Suffice to say, some sectors have been, some subsectors within pharmaceutical specifically, have seen volumes drop. If you listen to the news, you'd probably think that doctors' rooms were overrun, but the actual truth is that the opposite was occurring, is that a lot of people who would generally be going to doctors' rooms for normal ailments and normal treatment conditions are not or have not been going, and script volumes as a result have fallen in certain areas. But in certain other areas, and you see the President of the United States or other leading politicians talking about the benefits of drugs like hydrochloroquine, causes a rush on certain products. Similarly, paracetamol volumes went through the roof that you couldn't get your hands on it, but ibuprofen, which falsely was made to believe to be counterproductive for those suffering with COVID, sells product didn't move at all. So, if you wouldn't want to be, and I'm sure there might be some of you who are on this panel or on this call today who are involved in demand planning, it's not a job I'd want to be involved in right now, because forecasting your demand would be incredibly difficult. And then similarly with airlines, airlines, or not similarly, I should say, dissimilarly with airlines, is that they've come to a grinding halt. Runways parked with airplanes demonstrate what's happened to that industry. And that's been the one sector in our business where we've had to stand down people because literally there were no roles available for them. And where we could replace, obviously we have, and we've been quite successful in doing that. But for some, just based on geographic locations, that's proved to be very difficult. But effectively, that sector of our business and of the industry per se has almost come to a standstill in its entirety. I think Melbourne, Sydney is the busiest route, or one of the 2 busiest routes. There's one flight between the two cities at the moment today. What does this all mean longer term? So, and possibly some areas for discussion later on the talk, but from my perspective, this will create a future change in terms of stock and safety stock holdings in country. We've spoken to a number of our customers and manufacturers and industry people who will not be that reliant or exclusively reliant on overseas supply going forward. It's too much of a risk for one supply chain to have, as some industries would have, 30, 40 days worth of inventory sitting in country and reliant on overseas supply, when what the last 3 months has shown us that creates massive peaks and troughs in ability to supply the market. So our belief is that there will be increased future stock hold in the country. That in itself has an impact from a manufacturer's perspective on working capital, how much working capital will have to be tied in country in stock. From a logistics perspective, what would that mean to warehousing space? For an organization like ourselves who has hundreds and hundreds of thousands of square meters of warehouse space, whilst that sounds great that we will hopefully pick up more storage requirements, a 5 or 10% increase across the board would mean perhaps another 100,000 meters of space that has to be created. Again, more capital, more time, and not something that can be turned on at the drop of a hat. So it will require some planning. And I think also from a supply perspective, looking particularly to supply chain, long-term pricing of arrangements between customers of ours and of our industry, such as manufacturers, and suppliers like 3PLs or logistics companies, I believe the dynamic will change. So what we've seen recently is, very recently, where the China borders opened, freight was becoming available to be shipped, but there's an absolute shortage of aircraft carrying stock, primarily because so much freight travels on passenger aircraft. So with that shutting down, it was a big push on freight demand, on freight aircraft. And that's now those customers who are most loyal or most who are paying top dollar are the ones getting the capacity, whereas those who either can't afford top dollar or perhaps have shopped around in the past and not necessarily had a lot of loyalty to specific orders have probably found it difficult to find capacity. I think that will bring a change in behavior, whereas the last 2 to 3 years, a lot of the engagements that we have seen have been very procurement-driven engagements. I believe that there may well be a move back to relationship and partnership type engagements going forward, out of necessity to just protect one supply chain. Thanks, Monique. If we can go to the next slide. So the power of supply chain. I don't think anyone's going to question that any further than based on what's happening in COVID, and your industry is really well positioned to cater to those needs going forward. Every politician, every leader who stands up and speaks at some point is referencing the supply chain. Shortages, blockages, oversupply, undersupply, timing, etc. And I think all and sundry have realized that the supply chain obviously directly impacts customer experience, but also things like the share price, employee engagement, brand reputation, and obviously the bottom line. More so than any time than during a global crisis is being proven to be true. Given how powerful the supply chain is to a customer's business, we have had to be flexible and adapt quickly and make decisive decisions. To help future-proof our customer supply chains, we, at the time when I said we realized how serious this was, we made some, I'd say, 2 very important calls. One was to send non-essential people, when I say non-essential that they work from the office home as quickly as possible and as permanently as possible, which we've done, which doesn't come with its own challenges. I can speak firsthand, having 4 children at home, who now think that dad's there to support their homework requirements has been quite a challenge. But more importantly, to be able to demonstrate, we've also been able to demonstrate that working from home can work, bandwidth and other technical issues aside. I believe this is something that will also have a longer term impact. The other thing that we did was we implemented a dual shift operation in our warehouses quite quickly, purpose being to de-risk and mitigate the risk within the supply chain of an entire shift or team or warehouse going down due to COVID, still being able to supply essential products, be they healthcare products or consumer retail, etc. These were two big calls that came at a cost, but at the same time, all our partners pretty much recognized the criticality of doing what we were doing and why it was critical for them, and got on board very quickly with us on doing that. It also brought new requirements to our portfolio in terms of cleaning equipments and ensuring that we were able to maintain highest levels of sanitation between shifts, deep cleaning. You know, again, it came at a cost, but prevention was the best methodology in our minds. And as things have developed, we've started doing a lot of these cleaning, creating these cleaning kits for our sites across the country to mitigate cost management or mitigate cost and also time management. So these were a couple of things that we did quite quickly. We also had to flex our transport teams up as well, as opposed to doing one pickup during the day or normal stage pickups. They were now being extended to different hours of the day. So just managing the physical pickup of product, the flow of product of information, keeping information up and running, and then trying to still ensure we deliver to SLAs was a key driver and a key challenge for us. But I believe, not with trying to be anything arrogant in any case at all, but I believe we managed this well so that we've seen little to, dare I say, almost no impact to our customers' supply chains and ability to continue supplying product for them. Hopefully we'll be able to revert that in due course following government guidance, but our staff have really also engaged from that. They've seen that we've taken care of them, that we've looked after their interests by minimizing impact or engagement or contact with others as best as possible with other people, but also ensuring that the cleanliness and hygiene around the sites. Thanks, Monique. I'll go to the next slide, which is about change, innovation, and improvement. The last slide, I spoke a little bit about it, but from our perspective, we as leading players in this industry have to be ambassadors of change, innovation, and improvement. You know, whilst customers buy quality and they buy consistency, they also want to buy into improvement and continuous improvement. It goes without saying, and maybe moving slightly off the COVID topic for a period of time, our labor costs relative to any other first world country or any other players out there other markets out there are incredibly high. That's not to say we can't rely on labor. Of course we do, and we want to continue growing jobs and creating jobs for people. But there are many rudimentary tasks, not necessarily the most repetitive and not always the most healthy tasks that can and must and will be automated as time goes by. And we're working ourselves to this position on a consistent basis. New technology does play an important part in improving operations and removing costs and hopefully improving customer service. Our customers do benefit from technology advances, and as we consistently review and evaluate and adopt these solutions. And a good example, as you can see from the picture of the individual, augmented reality is already being used to optimize warehouse processes. So are automated guided vehicles and AMRs and a number of other acronyms I could mention, but there are a lot of tools that are being deployed, ultimately with creating a safer and more expedient, but more aligned model, services model to what the industry needs going forward. We as an organization invest in trend research and solution development to match against those trend the research done in trends, not only for our own benefit, to enable collaboration with our customers as well, so that hopefully we get the best outcome for all. Just one or two more slides, if we could move to the next one, about our responsibility for our customers' businesses. A customer, when they're outsourcing, does put tremendous amount of trust in the supply chain. And when things go well, that's great, but one only has to see things when they don't go well to realize the impact that the supply chain can have on sales, finance, and everything else. We also have to know when to embrace change, but also when to push back on customers' requirements, which may not necessarily be best practice. This mantra that the customer is always right, in my opinion, is wrong. There are times when the customer needs to be challenged based on what best practice looks like and why certain behaviors should not, or certain practices should not be followed. There are other challenges that are facing that companies are looking for now from a stability perspective that are based on activities that are happening from a macro and environmental perspective. So we've discussed quite a bit of COVID, but the other item, which perhaps this week is more topical than most weeks, relates to cybersecurity. We've seen industry players being affected by that and the massive impact that has on customers' reliability of service. And whilst some customers will be understanding, they can only be so understanding up to a point. Thereafter, businesses will fail if they can't supply inventory and supply stock to their customers. And having a partner who has stable environment, secure environment, with no guarantees ever, nobody can, but having the most robust and secure processes in place to protect their customer supply chain is something we are seeing more and more of in every audit undertaken by new and existing partners of ours. And something that obviously we manage incredibly seriously just due to the risk of not getting it right. The other being financial security. The supply chain industry, for those in 3PL and logistics organizations, is a very skinny margin industry. Primarily those who are successful have scale, and those who compete purely on cost without the significant scale are always running a precarious slope of success or failure. And all it takes is an incident like a COVID where certain customers aren't paying or may not pay in due time. And we've already seen one or two organizations falling over. So getting the best price, the lowest price from a supplier perspective or from a manufacturer perspective, whilst appealing, doesn't always give the best guarantee of service, because 1 week's lost sales would more than erode any saving held in pushing a couple % out of a supply chain organization. I think companies more and more are looking into, certainly from our perspective, we get asked a lot about our financial security and stability, while for a big public company like ourselves, that's relatively easy to answer. It's not always easy for everybody, for a number of smaller players. But we do understand why customers are asking us, and it's something that we would clearly be supportive of as well. If I can just move to my last slide, please, Monique. I suppose the thing that we've done a lot of in our business is try and create a sector focus mantra. I spoke earlier about retail, healthcare, and airline business services. We've also done similarly in consumer and tech and service logistics industries, so that as a supply chain organization, not only do we understand what it is that we have to provide, but we also understand what it is we are doing for the impact and how that impacts our customer's customer. Because ultimately that's who's the one who needs to be served. It's not even our customer, it's the person that they are supplying to. And changes that are afoot in their industry, whether they be due to technology, due to climate change, due to environmental change, COVID, etc., will have different impacts, as I highlighted earlier, to different industries. Our ability to flex and react and respond is what our customers want. And as a result, we've always made the decision to invest in sector-focused experts who are best placed to answer, as opposed to generalists who may not have the in-depth knowledge that certain sectors demand. Because the supply chain for a B2C environment is certainly different to a B2B, and supply chain for a tech environment is certainly different to what you might experience in animal health, as an example. So for us, that is how we make the effort to understand our customers' business and also our customers' requirements. I think that was kind of all I wanted to talk to. I think, Monique, the next slide is just the conclusion, but hopefully a few ranges of topics, from COVID to change to technology to cyber threats and security, and also to understanding different market sectors, can allow for some questions that hopefully I'm in a position to answer. So maybe I'll hand over back to you, Monique.
Hi, Saul. It's Mark. Very interesting.
Sorry, Mark, yeah.
Thank you very much for that presentation. It's certainly very interesting to hear what you have done in leading your organisation. I think I've got a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you. So my first one, how do you see the supply chain recovering from the backlog and disruption caused by COVID-19?
Yeah, I think it's going to well, 2 points. The one thing is what when we return to normal is something that I keep getting asked, and I don't believe we will ever have a normal again. I spoke last week in a different forum, and I was talking about post 9/11. People suddenly took it for an accepted norm and have ever since, that being checked thoroughly before boarding an aircraft is just normal practice. Whereas prior to 9/11, that wasn't the way it was. And that's just become a new norm. I suspect the new norm for us will mean a change from supply chain management perspective, planning perspective, certainly demand planning, stock holding. All of these things are going to be an outcome in some form or another of this COVID pandemic. I touched briefly a little bit about increased inventory holdings. I know that certain of our customers hold minimal just-in-time type inventory levels in the country. And when things are running well, that's great, because that's lean, that's efficient, that's cost effective. But over a period of the next 3 to 6 to 12 months, we will invariably see an increase in stock holdings. So to answer your question in a roundabout way, I think that will have a material impact, because getting that balance right, getting a better understanding of what new demand will look like, and also the breakdown between B2B and B2C, and how supply chain organizations flex for that differently, will also be a big challenge for that. I had a customer yesterday say to me, their financial year end is coming up and he's got to do his budgeting. He says, I have no idea how to budget for next year. This was the CEO of the organization. He says, the last 3 months have been like a yo-yo. We don't know what's up, what's down, what's norm, what's not. And I suspect they are not alone. So for me, how we get on top of this, how we get back to normal, will be a period of learning. We don't know if there's going to be a second wave or third or fourth wave, or if a vaccine is going to come. All of those will have dramatic impacts on the supply chains going forward. It's about being as flexible and reactive as one can be in this time to deal with those different challenges as they inevitably will come.
Yeah, so as you mentioned in your presentation, there's some probably worried demand planners there, and I think we could put CFOs in the same bucket, trying to understand what the future is going to be for their businesses. I've got a question here from the audience. What is DHL doing moving forward in terms of business continuity planning and risk assessment in preparation for the next pandemic? So DHL, like other businesses, is going through the current pandemic of COVID-19, but what's the planning or what's the thought process for the next wave or the next pandemic that potentially DHL and any other business is going to face? Could you talk to that, please?
Yeah, I think every catastrophe brings about the opportunity to learn from it, or every challenge. I suppose in some ways we were maybe a little bit better off than some of our competitors, just based on how much of our customer base or the market share we have in the pharmaceutical space. And pharmaceutical companies have always insisted on robust BCPs, business continuity plans in play. So a lot of what we've had to do is an extension of that. Certainly the deep cleaning between site moves, site shifts, the temperature monitoring, putting in thermal imaging, temperature imaging in play. Those things have been new developments. What we've now done is we've now created a BCP process that is not just for our healthcare customers. It's been extended for those healthcare customers, but now has been rolled out to all sectors of our business, which under normal circumstances, in inverted commas, may not have been as stringently requiring a robust BCP in play. So we've also got the benefit within DHL of having global best practice to reach on. So when this first broke, I was on a call with fellow CEOs of mine across the world as to what best practices were being applied in other markets that we may not have thought of. And between us, we had the bases covered, but individually, I don't think any one organization or country had it perfectly. And we'll continue to do that. So post this crisis being at the peak where it is, certainly places like America are way in the middle of it, and parts of Europe, the UK, we will do more deep dives and more reviews as to fine tune this on a continual basis. But certainly our processes now are a lot stronger than what they were maybe 6 months ago, and they will continue to evolve accordingly.
Will you see retailers using more of an omni-channel supply chain from now on? What's your, what messages are you getting from your customers? What sort of insights could you share with the participants and the audience?
Absolutely. That's the one dramatic change that we've seen. And it's almost been a paradigm shift. So I was speaking to one top retailer, senior person in one of the big retailers the other day, who was saying they always knew that their business was going to evolve from a 95 or something in the 90s B2B to maybe a 60, 70% B2B. They just didn't realize that would happen as quickly as it has, because it's happened, and what they thought would happen over 5 years has happened in 3 months. And the likelihood of that reverting back to type, I believe, is very low. Whilst it may come back a little bit, in my own personal opinion, when I say 90 B2B, 10 B2C, now moving to 60-40, maybe it'll go back to a 70-30, but it's not going to go back to a 90-10. I think people, all of us on this call undoubtedly have had an experience of trying to buy something online more so than what they have done before. I think my wife's on first name terms with most of the couriers out there, not just the DHL ones, because we seem to be getting a lot of deliveries. And that's just the way it is, and that's the new norm. And I think that will continue to be it. So the omni-channel basis is not whether one wants to participate in that as an optional nice to have. It's now very much a core part of business for industries that may not have thought it ever to be a core part of their business going forward, again, in my opinion.
Yeah, interesting. I think another question that we've got from the attendees is around skills and capabilities with supply chain professionals. What's your thoughts on skills or capabilities that existing supply chain professionals need room to develop?
Yeah, I think across our business, I've certainly tried to push the messaging in the last 5 years, maybe 3 years, of greater focus on technical skills and technological skills. If I look at it from a low level, from a store person point of view, the people that we used to hire 10, 15 years ago are different to those we're hiring now. The ones we're hiring now and the ones who are most likely to progress further in our careers have backgrounds or understanding from an engineering type perspective. They understand technology, they understand automation. That's for those operating within the 4 walls. And for those operating in an office type environment, having a deeper appreciation of what big data and the technology can provide and the analytics behind it is so much more critical than ever. The big grizzly bloke, stereotypical bloke pushing boxes or picking boxes up and moving them in a warehouse is not what we see as the critical thing going forward. It's how do people interact with robotics and automation? How do we speed and streamline processes? How do we take out waste and cost? And most importantly, how do we do this environmentally sustainably? It's those kind of peoples and skills that we are looking to attract more of, and people who have operational understanding generally are better equipped to do that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I share the same thoughts. Certainly supply chain, and you've really put supply chain as the focus, and it is important, as you've demonstrated through this presentation. It's certainly, we all need to keep skilling ourselves throughout this time and going forward. What's your thoughts on the time frame for recovery of the freight market? So a lot of industry participants have been hit with, larger than normal or larger than expected air freight rates. What's your sense of when some sort of normalization is going to come back into the market?
Look, not specifically my area of expertise, considering I'm in the supply chain contract logistics side, but what I do know from close conversations and communications I have with my global forwarding colleagues is that I believe the number is 70% of freight, certainly within Australia, moves on passenger aircraft. So if we extrapolate that globally, that's not going to come back to norm. Obviously, some of that shortfall has been picked up now by charter hire, which comes at great cost. But until we see normalization of typical passenger aircraft back to what it was or something close, we are going to see this imbalance between supply and demand, just based on the absolute capacity available in the marketplace. There's hundreds of aircraft ground across the world are not carrying any freight at the moment. So it's a pure economics dilemma between supply and demand at this stage. Again, I don't profess to be an expert in global forwarding, but that's what I can see and what I'm understanding from what's currently happening in the market.
In terms of, manufacturing, and there's been lots in the press making references to bringing back manufacturing in Australia. What's your insights, thoughts, and potential, insights you've received from your customers about, the shift towards manufacturing in Australia?
Yeah, I think there's a cyclical sensation I'm picking up. There's a initial kind of response to what's happened, which is we have to be less reliant on overseas suppliers such as China. We have to be more self-reliant. We need to kickstart manufacturing back in the country. And that sounds great, and it sounds practical, and it sounds the right thing to say. But my personal take is that wave of this, if not emotion, that wave of pull will subside somewhat when we have a sense of normality returning back to the supply chain. Albeit there will be some organizations who will clearly push for more manufacturing in country, which would be great. Don't get me wrong. I think it would be great if we did. The practical challenge of that is that it's been proven over the last 20 years that from a cost effectiveness point of view, we just haven't been able to be cost effective as a local producer, which is why we see manufacturing going offshore. So perhaps there'll be a tendency or a sentiment within the consumer base to pay a little bit more for the fact that product is homegrown and homemade. But for how long is my question. Do we see the cycle then blow up, and in 3, 5, 7 years time, people forget why it was that manufacturing came back onshore, and rather revert to what's cheapest and what's most cost effective for me as a consumer or as a distributor or as a manufacturer? And am I not better off going back to where supply is more affordable? That's my fear and concern, is that we'll do something, but can we do it sustainably and cost competitively over the long period?
Yes. Yeah, I think these thoughts are great now, but the sustainability in the long term is something that also needs to be considered.
Well, how do you, it always amazed me as an immigrant to this country 15 odd years ago, that somebody would walk into a big retail store and pay $8 for a pair of jeans, as you've seen in the past, $9, whatever, for a pair of jeans. And I always shook my head and said, how is this good for anybody to be paying $8 or $9 for a pair of jeans? Whether the quality is terrible or not, but that's what we as a consumer-based society have become used to. So now when you tell somebody, well, the actual cost of that needs to be probably closer to 3 times that to have any chance of it being successful local producers as a minimum, are people going to pay that? Because, it's like the $2 milk scenario. No one ever said milk had to cost $2, but we've created this false economy that we feel like we need to have milk at $2 in order for us to buy it and feel comfortable with buying it. I just think there needs to be a mindset change, not just a rhetoric change as, we need to have local production. It needs to be accompanied with, this is going to cost more in certain cases, and this is why it will cost more, but that's better for us if it is indeed the case.
It's exactly right. A complete mindset shift. We've spoken a lot about risks and the impacts. Just my final question is more around sustainability. The question is, supply chains have a large carbon footprint. How can the industry improve its green credentials? It'd be nice to hear some of DHL's thoughts around the changes it's making to go green.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, it is something that's, we as DHL have got three core principles, or three underlying principles around shareholders, people, staff, and customers. And about 10, 15 years ago, we added a fourth dimension, which was the environment. So I think at the time, we were the first supply chain organization to set a CO2 reduction target, which was set for 2020 of the 2007 base to reduce by 30%. And then 3 or 4 years later, when we achieved that target ahead of time, we set a zero emissions by 2050 target, which we've seen subsequently a number of organizations follow suit on, which is fantastic to see. So that's the first thing we've done, which I'm proud of. I'm proud of the fact that that's something my organization has looked at doing and has done. The second thing we've done, we partnered with Qantas on the Qantas Future Partner Program, whereby we offset all our emissions as an organization. And also, most importantly, from our perspective, we do that to local initiatives. So all the offsets, all the money we're spending on these offsets are going to, whether that be in Cairns, whether it be into the Great Barrier Reef or forest deforestation in other areas, all meaningful and viable projects, which we've also allowed our customers to participate in as well and get that benefit. And then the third thing we're doing a lot more of in Australia, and we've just recently opened a 32,000 meter air conditioned warehouse shed in Western Sydney with the largest solar roofing paneling in the country, as far as I'm aware, with I think it's a 1.7 megawatt capacity for solar generation from that. So those are the kinds of things we're doing, and we will continue to do that. We've got a number of initiatives across our business, but it's something we take very seriously, suffice to say.
Thanks, Saul. I'm just looking for some additional questions before we work towards wrapping up. I think one question certainly around transport and logistics is, mitigating risks and uncertainties. What sort of strategies is DHL implementing or looking at implementing to balance the potential ongoing risks within transport and logistics?
Yeah, it's probably a question more longer than the time will permit me to answer, but there are a couple of things. Again, from a pure play transport perspective, we've seen the industry move from, we've seen certain behaviors from end retailers drive companies A, out of business, or B, very close to being out of business. And that's caused, I believe, a big risk to certainly the line haul industry in this country. So we've had to de-risk as much of that as possible by becoming as self-sufficient as possible on that, so as to ensure that we will have continuity of supply. I mean, in a country the size of Australia, with a population as thinly spread across it, it is a very complex thing to do. So that's something that, because I suppose we have financial means to do that, we've made quite significant investments. The other things, similarly from a warehousing perspective, is to ensure that there's sufficient capacity countrywide in the event that a natural disaster with you know, forest fires and storms and floods and everything else that we seem to have been affected by in the last few months, giving us that diversity of supply and the ability to pick up freight from other parts of the country to mitigate risks that we would otherwise have if we had all our stock coming out of, say, Western Sydney, has also been a big part of that. And then the third component relates to technology. I mentioned that earlier, but you know, nothing happens without technology now, and all that has to see is how everything comes to a grinding halt when you have unstable tech supply. So ensuring that we have robust and disaster recovery solutions globally that are well protected and insulated, enabling us to, in the event of the worst scenario occurring, being able to flick a switch and a few hours later being able to run on a parallel network is critical to our business stability and success. And I suspect every organization will be doing similarly going forward.
Great. Thank you, Saul. It's been a pleasure having you on this webinar today. We've reached the close of time for today's webinar. I'd like to thank our co-host, Anna Costa from Michael Page, and I'd like to thank Saul for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for having me.
Don't forget, if you'd like to continue the discussion after the webinar, there will be a post in our closed LinkedIn group for you to comment and share some key learnings from today. Let us know if you require a CPD point by typing CPD in the Q&A box before you leave the webinar. Thanks for joining us today. Stay safe. Bye-bye.